Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think we have folks from every part of the planet, which is great. My name is Paul Dibellow. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sales and Business Development, Business Partnerships here at FireCompass. I have the distinct honor today of hosting what I hope and I know will be a very informative and interactive panel with some very talented cybersecurity leaders. This session, just to let everybody know, has been organized by the CISO Platform. The topic for our discussion today: why is the Gartner Group talking about external attack surface management? A new acronym that we're all going to start to see. We don't have enough acronyms in our business, right? Our industry, so called EASM. So our panelists will give you some critical insights, common use cases, talk a little bit about some comparisons and contrasts with a lot of the different types of again, Gartner and industry, Forrester and industry acronyms that we see out there as it relates to the concept of attack surface recon and surface management, as well as exploitation and continuous testing, and talk a little bit of how it relates to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. This session today will be a precursor to the 13th annual CISO Platform Summit, which will take place next week on, I believe, June the 2nd and 3rd. So it's a little teaser in advance of the sessions that we'll all be a part of next week. We're going to touch upon understanding a little bit about this, especially in where we are in our crazy little upside down world that we're all living in today. Understand a little bit more about the external attack surface management use cases, the use of EASM, effective strategies that are being deployed by industry leading organizations, both from a direct end user perspective as well as partner perspective, and how testing external perimeters can validate what can and cannot be discovered. So I like to use the term unknown unknowns. And that's an area that EASM is really focusing on, and we're seeing some very, very interesting and very positive results. So without further ado, let me introduce the members of our panel. I will go one by one and let them talk about themselves, because what I say will not do them justice in their exploits in their past. Ed Adams, I'd like to introduce you to say a few lines about yourself, sir.
Hello, thank you, Paul. Welcome, everyone. I am Ed Adams. I'm the president and CEO of Security Innovation, an organization that specializes in software security. I'm also a research fellow for the Ponemon Institute, and I'm a leader and board member for the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals, otherwise known as ICMCP. Happy to be on this panel. Thank you.
Ed, thanks very much. Appreciate it. It's great to have you here. In beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. It's great. Our next panelist is Tejas Shroff. Tejas out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area today. We're representing today my old stomping grounds down there. Tejas, a few words about yourself, sir.
Yes, I'm a senior director in the cloud security managed practice at NTT Data, but before that, almost 20 plus years in the security industry. I'm also a faculty at UT Dallas teaching our master students, especially in the cybersecurity program. So, and I'm also a board member of North Texas InfraGuard, which is a collaboration between FBI and private sector in strengthening the processes and practices around both FBI, actually Department of Homeland Security, and private sector coming together to understand the common grounds and have some collaboration. So thanks, Paul, again for having me on the panel.
Thanks, Tejas. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you down in Texas in Father's Day week. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And our third panelist is Bikash Barai. Bikash, a little bit about yourself, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So I'm Bikash Barai, one of the co-founders of FireCompass as well as CISO Platform. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Bikash. Appreciate it. I know Bikash pretty well. We work together. He's my boss. I have to say that, Bikash, you're the man. Anyway, we're going to keep this very light today. I do want to say before we get into the discussion about external attack surface management, the value proposition overall and what the industry is bearing, I'd like to do as much interaction as we possibly can. I know this is we have everybody muted and it's a webinar type of panel discussion, and we're all on Zoom, and hopefully one day very soon we're all doing this with microphones like the old days and pass it around the auditorium. But any questions that anybody might have, please make this as interactive as you possibly can. Throw it into the chat, into the chat window. Pulami, who is our marketing director, she's behind the scenes that makes all this stuff happen. She'll take the questions and throw them our way, and I can post them to the panelists. So please don't be shy. Let's make this as interactive as possible. So at this point, gentlemen, any questions, any thoughts before we jump right in?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So what seems like a relatively simple question, but isn't. So I'm going to post this over to Bikash. Bikash, put you right on the spot right from the start. What is external attack surface management? What problems does it solve? What are some use cases, some that you're seeing in the market today? Please give us your synopsis of the EASM platform.
So let me start with like EASM. What is EASM? And I'll let Ed and Tejas also to kind of add to that. So let me start with what is EASM and what problem does it solve? Or rather, let me start with the problem first. So I remember, I mean, if we go back like 2 decades, I had been there in the industry, I mean, since probably a couple of decades. So if I look at the way the hacking landscape has kind of changed over a period of time, so it went through a lot of interesting phases. So there were times when the hacking used to happen more through compromise of the network level vulnerabilities. Then came a phase where application level vulnerabilities took over. And then a little bit later, something very strange happened when the industry went through like 2 decades of vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, and all this super cool stuff. We started seeing some strange stuff happening in last few years. And I'll give you an example. One of the strange stuff is like one of the topmost names in the financial services companies got compromised because they had a open database without any password. And I have very high respect for these guys. They're great folks, and they have got great tools and team. So the question is like, why did that happen? Why did they get compromised? Because they had no password for the database. I mean, that doesn't sound obvious or something which is normal or common, right? So if you look at this as an issue, there's something new which got started in last 4, 5, 6 years, or last 3, 4, 5 years. And that new thing that got started is that unlike say 5, 6 years before, when anything that had to go online had to go through the central IT team, anybody and everybody couldn't create things and make it go live online. You had to go through the IT team. It was difficult. But today, fast forward, today marketing team can create things on their own and make it go live. The projects team can create something on their own. Cloud guys, DevOps guys can create things on their own. We're talking about an agile world, decentralized world. So all of a sudden, what has happened is the central control of the assets that goes online and the central visibility of your asset inventory all of a sudden went for a toss. And that is the reason why we see a lot of these apparently strange compromises, which looks like this great company got compromised because they had this simple vulnerability. Obviously, those great companies wouldn't kind of miss out something like that. And that happened with this specific FSI organization, where this particular database was made online by their marketing team. So this is a new problem which was not there 5-6 years back, because at that point in time things were tightly controlled and it was difficult to take things online. So because of this problem, I kind of talk about, like, there are two kinds of compromises which I see. One kind of compromise is because of nails, and the other is because of nuclear weapons. And let me explain that. What do I mean? So I remember during my childhood days, we used to, I read this poem about, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost, and for want of a shoe, the horse was lost, and for want of a horse, the general was lost, and for want of a general, the leader, the battle was lost. So something like that. So it's a small, sorry, I kind of started it wrong. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. So you start with the nail, and because of a missing nail, the battle is lost. And that kind of compromises are happening. Some small misconfiguration somewhere, which is causing a large organization to get breached. And many of those are like shadow IT, unknown assets, which are not known to the organization. And then there are others which are nuclear weapons kind of stuff, which is zero-day attacks. I mean, those are very rare. Very rarely somebody gets compromised because of a zero-day or a very complex multi-stage attack. So those are more like nuclear weapons. So most of the battles are lost not because of a nuclear bomb being deployed. It is lost because of a nail. And that nail, those small issues which are there in the attack surface, this is kind of proliferating in a very, very big way. So how do we then manage that? So managing our external attack surface, managing those small things out there which can cause a big breach. So this became a problem of today, which was not there 5-6 years back. And today, because of remote working and because of all these digital transformation, cloud, etc., it's just going to get worse. And that is the reason why EASM came into being. EASM got coined as a word by Gartner. Gartner calls EASM as external attack surface management, so that the idea is about getting a visibility of all the assets that you have, knowing what's your attack surface like, what are the risks associated with that, and doing it at a scale. Earlier, or even now, there are different other analysts who call it attack surface management, but Gartner created this new market called external attack surface management, which only focuses on the external attack surface and not the internal. So that's a kind of brief genesis, brief or long genesis, and the reason behind why EASM came into being. So I would let probably Ed, Tejas, Paul, you guys add more.
I'd be happy to, Bikash. Now, I love that story about nukes and nails. I'm definitely going to be lifting that one for you and using it myself. That's a good one. And yes, I think external attack surface management is something that's been long overdue for industry coverage from the analysts. And I think of attack surface as just the sum of all potential digital doorways into an enterprise, and that includes third-party suppliers, partners, cloud services from cloud service providers, work from home setup, everything. But of course, discovery, that's just the first step. It's a critical step, but it's just the first step. But now that you've got that discovery and inventory, which by the way, most organizations don't have, they have no idea. But once you've got that, then what do you do with it? You still have to classify and categorize it by risk level. With limited staff and money, you have to figure out how to mitigate high risks while reducing your attack surface by maybe turning off unnecessary services or shutting down that shadow ID. The fast adoption of things like IoT and cloud services have really made attack surface management imperative. And I'm really glad that the analyst community is finally taking a look at it. It's a critically important thing. It is a component of enterprise vulnerability management. But one thing that I think is really important for folks to understand is that attack surface management and external attack surface management is something that has to be ongoing and persistent, because asset and stats are always in flux. So real-time perpetual attack surface insight is key.
And just to add to what both Bikash and Ed said, I think as Bikash greatly pointed out with his analogy, I'll add an analogy of mine. How I look at it as attack surface management is taking a simple house analogy. You have your house and you have your main door or the door which faces to the outside world and the windows which open up to the outside world. That is truly your attack surface. The ones internally, you can control it. You don't treat it the same way as you would treat it to the outside world. And that's the reason why Gartner stressed on the fact using the word external as compared to, as Bikash said, a lot of companies had been calling it attack surface management. But the key word is what is external is more important, even though we hear a lot of times that the insider threat is more important, but that's for a different day discussion. We all know that what is internal, we can all still manage. We've at least gone through some vetting and trusting process as compared to what is external is complete unknown. So just wanted to add that analogy to build it. And just one more thing I'd add is these days the digital assets are adding up daily. Means if you slept on it for a week and then you found out, you've gone and added a couple of more digital assets, be it and maybe a simple thing such as an IoT device in your house, and you just added more external attack surface which you had, and you expanded your surface.
Yeah, you're a great lead-in for me, Tejas. I appreciate it. I was actually going to I'm gonna hang off of your analogy of the external, right? The external facing door, the windows that face the outside world, right? So if you're standing on the outside looking in, so Ed, I'm gonna throw this over to you, but what are some of the tools and techniques for doing external attack surface management? And I'm gonna prompt you a little bit, because I've been, the industry is growing, and there have been a lot of really good tools out there for a number of years that just do the reconnaissance, the discovery, the inventory, right? And then they say, here you go, right, Mr. and Miss Customer, it's yours now, right? So have at it, right? But I think there are other tools, some newer tools and techniques and procedures where it's not good enough, right, Tejas? It's not good enough to just be able to say, I think that door's unlocked, and if I go like this, I might be able to get inside, but I'm not going to touch it, because that would be like the big red button, right? Everybody's afraid of the big red button, right? I think that window's cracked, but and maybe I'll peek in, but I don't. So Ed, some of the kind of the things we're starting to see in the market, tools and techniques and procedures for external attack surface management that really takes it to that next level. Could you maybe elaborate on some of that?
Yeah, for sure. The next generation of external attack surface management, it takes the concept of scanning from the outside in, to the next level, where instead of just inspecting the window, it looks like there's a crack on it, you actually tap on the window. Is this really a crack? And see if it is a crack, because that gives you a lot more context as far as calculating risk, and also gives you some direction as far as what you need to do to mitigate that particular threat. And now, external attack surface management needs to be integrated with other existing technologies, whether it's threat intelligence feeds, security information and event management, or SIMs, even cloud providers to help streamline investigation and remediation process for discovered vulnerabilities. Now, one thing that I like about Gartner is they're big on graphs and charts, and I'm a particularly visual person. And in their latest report on external attack surface management, this is also true, except here, instead of building a quadrant, because they're really big on quadrants, it's more like kind of two axes. And Gartner describes EASM along the horizontal or x-axis as external view versus internal view, and then the y or vertical axis as breadth versus depth. So if you look at external attack surface management, it clearly exists in the quadrant that is defined as high breadth, high external view, which again is very important, because you've got to go as broad as possible, and you have to be doing it constantly. And then, now, this varies dramatically from long-standing practices such as dynamic application security testing, or DAST, which is high depth, high external, or behind the firewall vulnerability assessments, or penetration testing internally, which is high depth, high internal. All of these things are still necessary and important. However, the external attack surface management really complements them very well, and should be the tip of the spear. It's kind of the leading indicator to let you know, what might be a serious problem that needs further investigation. In fact, you might even use an EASM platform and the results of it to help streamline and focus an application or an internal security testing effort. And we're seeing a lot of organizations lead with EASM and have that really feed the rest of their security maturity and their security practices.
That's excellent. Yeah, the depth and the breadth, that's really important. So where you can get that wide visual view that we really never have had, or we've had, but it's been extremely manually intensive. Now we have automated tools that can get us that 80% of the way there with the breadth. And then I do very much like, I personally come from the threat intelligence world, and we could take an actor and we could track that actor, and that's depth. But I'll tell you what, where that actor had the ability to, that actor or variants of that actor group, right, where that they could take that from a wide perspective or laterally within a very large organization was always the biggest challenge, right? You're giving me that rifle shot, but you're not giving me the shotgun blast, right? So, Bikash, anything to add from your experience in the market? Because you do come from the DAS world, right? I mean, as Ed was talking about, so the breadth versus the depth, and then taking that really from discovery and reconnaissance and inventory to that next level of, and I'll throw this word out, the third piece that that I like to talk about in the industry as well, is there's breadth, there's depth, and then there's continuity, right? Then there's the continuous aspect. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit about that, what you're personally seeing in the market?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. So let me take this up into two parts. Paul, I recall you also asked this question on use cases, which I mentioned that let's first discuss on what is EASM. We'll come back to the use cases. So let's divide this into two parts. One is the use cases, and the second part is the tools, techniques, and procedures. So when it comes to the use cases, there are a few key use cases which EASM tool solves. So one is the asset inventory. And today, asset inventory has become a major challenge. Of course, EASM cannot do the internal assets. It can only do the external asset inventory. And for internal asset inventory, you have other set of tools. So asset inventory is one use case. Second use case is shadow IT discovery, discovering those unknown unknowns in your asset inventory. Now, when it comes to shadow IT, there are multiple tools which can help you in shadow IT. One is like the CASB kind of tools. The CASB tools can find out shadow IT in terms of what kind of applications are being used by the employees of an organization, which is not known to the IT team. But the CASB tools cannot find out a shadow IT of the kind where marketing created a new database somewhere while working with a third-party vendor, because that needs scanning the internet. Whereas CASB only scans the traffic which is coming out of your network. CASB does not scan all the internet assets, right? Whereas EASM scans all internet assets. So shadow IT, but of a different flavor, not of the flavor of CASB. So CASB and EASM solves this in a very complementary manner. What CASB does, EASM doesn't do. What EASM does, CASB doesn't do. So shadow IT is the other. The third use case is SOC augmentation. So you have today, imagine so many kind of alerts which are coming up, and we all know that SOC has this challenge in terms of which one should I act upon. That's a very hard challenge, right? So if EASM can feed this information to you, here is a new database that has gone online, which is misconfigured or runs a old version of a database, then any ping or port scan that comes there, you take it at a high priority. Whereas a normal ping, you don't take it at a high priority, right? So the intelligence coming from EASM could help the SOC. The fourth use case could also be where EASM augments threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is more about actors and their TTPs for the broad industry level. How can you make it pinpointed to a specific, like how that threat intelligence, that actor pose a risk for your organization? If you can correlate that with your attack surface and the risk, then you can make it more actionable. So augmenting TI will be another. Augmenting vulnerability management program is another use case, because if you don't know the assets, you can't put them in under the vulnerability management program, right? If you don't know that here is a pre-production system which is out there online and has got critical data, obviously you can't take any step related to that. So it also augments the vulnerability management program. It also augments red and blue teaming, because EASM does the first part, which is the reconnaissance, and then also the other set of tools EASM are also coming up, which are like the continuous automated red teaming tools, etc. So that also augments red teaming capability. So red teaming, blue teaming, or purple teaming, augmenting that as a capability. Control effectiveness testing as a part of that, that's another. So these are some 6-7 key use cases. So Paul, this is kind of in continuation to your previous question. So let me next move to the second question which you mentioned, which is about the tools, techniques, and procedures. So suppose you have to, or you want to build EASM capability. How do you get started with that? I mean, obviously there are multiple tools out there in the industry, and it is maturing. Red teaming is getting combined, etc. All those things. But let me give you a kind of share some of those options which are out there, which could also be part of, suppose, picking up open source tools. So let me start with open source tools, what you can do with open source tools. And I will also talk about later on the other technologies which are out there available. So if you look at EASM, the primary capability is nothing but reconnaissance, right? And if you find out, or if you try to find out the reconnaissance tools which are out there, if you just try out, do a Google search, you will find more than 500 such kind of reconnaissance tools which are out there, which can help you to discover various types of assets, which can help you to do subdomain discovery, etc., etc. So there are, I'm not naming all these tools, largely these are various small tools which you can tie it together, string it together, and use it, or somebody, a consultant, could use it. So you can use these reconnaissance tools, but these tools are not good enough. Along with the reconnaissance tools, you also need a lot of data. Like, for example, you need the IP whois information of the entire globe. Then you will be able to pinpoint your assets in a more accurate manner. So you also need to find out get all this whois information, the domain registration details. Now these data are, unfortunately, you can't get everything for free. So some of this data you have to buy. You need dark web information, which could also be utilized as a part of reconnaissance. So there are all these data which is out there which you need. Now the next part is using these tools and this data. You may initially just focus on open source intelligence. Don't buy any kind of data which is proprietary or which companies are selling. So I think that there's a good start where you can start with all these open source tools and open source intelligence data or publicly available data, and build an initial reconnaissance capability. And using that capability, you can then do it a few times, depending on how big your organization is. You can do it monthly or quarterly, etc., etc. So I would say that's the level 1 maturity, which you can get there using open source tools and open source intelligence. The next part is where you move to something which is enterprise grade automated tools which are out there, etc. And there are this set of companies which has invested in terms of buying this data, creating their own tools, doing that automation, which can now help you to do it on a regular basis. So if you look at these tools, you can start with open source tools, then gradually move to these enterprise grade tools. You can start with your internal team. If you could, you can go to consultants and ask them to do, or you can rely on the software as a service option. So there are right now various types of options, and a good way to kind of find out this information and knowledge would be, the keyword is reconnaissance rather than external attack surface management. So EASM is more of the market name, but if you want to find out the technical tools and all this stuff, I mean, go with the word recon. And interestingly, DEF CON used to do this Recon Village for quite a few years. They did it. Now, obviously, due to pandemic, etc., I don't know what's the state this year. So you will find a lot of interesting talks at DEF CON. on reconnaissance techniques. Check out what all things happened at Recon Village. Check out those talks, etc. So that's a good start. And then whenever you want to scale the program, etc., go for these tools which are out there available. And these tools also does the internet-wide scanning of every single IP address, collect those data, index it, and stuff like that. So these are some tools and techniques and procedures which I would highlight. And Tejas and Ed, if you guys want to add anything more on top of it.
So I think because you got it in a great way, you said the platform, but just to add to what Bikash said, Recon, or if you look at discovery is the key. Even if you look at a simple statistic from CIS, which publishes the top 20 controls, the first 5 controls are attributed to the fact about knowing your own stuff, inventorying your assets and inventorying your both hardware, software assets. And it shows that people who just apply the first 5 CIS controls are able to lower their risk by 85%. So a lot of times people run into issues, the companies, people, they themselves run into issues because others are doing recon about them, but they are not doing their own inventory. And that's where it is critical that you know what do you have. Because if you don't know what you have, going and starting to protect something is never going to help. It's the most important key is the discovery. Before you can even go to the next level of trying to protect, your first thing is knowing what you have.
Tejas, that's a great point. I mean, and I'll throw this out to you and maybe to Ed before we jump into the next topic I wanted to discuss. But what do you think about what do you think the uptake is and I hate using this term, but it is, everybody's using it, in this new normal world that we're living in, right? Where we now have almost like the wild, wild west again, right? We have a lot of people working from home that have never worked from home ever in their careers. We have the brick and mortar is now the cloud, and it's the cloud, you know, part 2, 3, 4, 5 mid-pandemic, and hopefully getting toward the end. But I don't think the world's ever going to be the same from a market perspective.
So Paul,
what are your thoughts there?
Paul, that's a great point. How I say that is the 2 Z's have taken and catapulted over in the A to Z of your day-to-day words, and those 2 Z's are, one is zero trust and one is Zoom. These 2 have basically taken over the world in the last one and a half years, because zero trust was a term which was loosely used, but all of a sudden it's become so critical because you no longer know who's trying to connect into the network. You have to authenticate each and every person before they can get into your network. You no longer can trust anyone. Obviously, Zoom, I won't go into it because we are on Google Meet, so I'm not going to go and talk about Zoom, but I'm just kidding. But
okay. Google's always listening. They're always listening.
But as you said, the new normal has been working remotely. You are people working from anywhere. You no longer know where people are connecting from. To use our current discussion, the attack surface has just expanded that much more exponentially. Earlier, people were working from their offices, so you had a controlled environment. Now, people can connect from anywhere. And that basically adds to the problem. Those discovery assets would never have been captured earlier because now people are using the BYODs. They are bringing their own devices. So they are not registered in the asset management tools. So the IP addresses are not registered in the asset management tools. A lot of companies are going away from VPN. So things like the secure gateway, etc., have started to take a lot of effect. Like how Bikash mentioned about CASB. Similarly, secure gateway also has gained a lot of prominence over the last couple of years, where people are now preferring secure gateway over VPN. So again, not here to solve the problem. I'll leave it to Ed, but just wanted to know the new normal has only expanded the attack surface, has created more possibilities of an attack than what we had before.
Well, let me throw one over to Ed, and this is really for both you Tejas and Ed, because of the world that you live in every day, right? Security innovation, NTT Data, you have a lot of large clients, you do a lot of services engagements as it relates to cyber exercises. You do, both from a training, but from a security assessment, security penetration testing, all of the old, a lot of the old monikers that have new kind of that you have to keep up with, because you have to try to stay ahead of the bad guys, right, and gals. So, Ed, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing with your customer base as it relates to, okay, so I think we've beaten the concept of surface management, external attack surface management dead, right? So it's about reconnaissance, it's about discovery, it's about asset inventory, and it's about doing that continuously, right? Because things are changing every day. What are your thoughts, Ed, about taking that from what we've seen over the past number of years, some really good EASM products out there, to the concept of continuous testing as well, right? So that's a biggie, right? And I'm using the word testing to be very generic on purpose, right? There's testing, there's red teaming, there's attacking, which again is the big red button that everybody's been afraid of forever. What are your thoughts on the evolution there? What are your clients saying to you about this kind of thing?
Yeah, so what I see as a growing trend, I do see things like attack simulation, hitting that big red attack button. I do think that's a natural extension for some of these EASM platforms. EASM is sometimes confused with BAS, or breach and attack simulation, but it should not be. Breach and attack simulation does not do that kind of scanning and reporting. What it does is it does that continuous testing of security controls by automating simulated attacks, using techniques similar to those found in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which I think we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. But BAS deployments historically are much more complex. They usually require some type of agent, or maybe multiple agents, to be installed in the corporate network. And BAS is still pretty immature in terms of its value versus other existing methods, like internal vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. So I think the value of BAS in and of itself is still to be determined, and I think I see it being consumed with an attack surface management type of platform, maybe starting from the outside and then just kind of expanding naturally internally. I still think that attack surface management has a very, very long runway. Most of our clients still cannot accurately say how many assets they have, and it does change every single day. So we're presently trying to sell them on the concept of not just attack surface management, but that perpetual, continuous, automated, kind of red teaming and the value of it. Because if you're not, well, let me put it this way: your infrastructure and endpoints are being tested continuously. Your choice is whether you want to do it as well, because someone is already doing it, guaranteed. So I definitely see the trend of these platforms kind of merging, and I think EASM will eventually morph into ASM and consume breach and attack simulation with continuous automated kind of red teaming tactics.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ed. I completely agree with you. Tejas, you and I were having an interesting discussion yesterday about kind of some of the differences between EASM and digital risk protection, DRP, some of the BAS stuff. And you had mentioned one of your clients whose name shall remain silent to protect the innocent. But yeah, you had an interesting use case, and I think it was back from 2018. And maybe you could explain that use case to the group, and then maybe how you might do that differently for your client at this point, 3 years later.
Absolutely. As Paul put it in the right perspective, it was 2018. So that time, no one had experienced this as remotely operating things, and people were still working off of the office. And yes, there were challenges, but the challenges in terms of number were relatively lower, because some of them were like not the known challenges, but the seen challenges. There were people you could see and you could know based on their behavior, but now you're treating with a complete unknown. You don't even know who the person connecting. If they don't turn their camera on, you don't know who's operating on the other side of things. So somebody might be working remotely, but you don't know who's really working on it. But to go into that use case, I think the use case we had done for a very large client of mine, and what we had done was they wanted to get an assessment done, and we did it on both sides. One from a external attack surface management, where we compiled a list of external assets and approached it from the outside with the external attack surface management to identify the list of discovery. And the other one was from the bottom up approach, using more of a security architecture. And based on that, we tried to converge and come up with a point. And we added the third angle to that. Some of those external assets, we even had some deep and dark web scans. And some of the results were so surprising. And one thing which I found as a part of my research was almost 90% of the transactions happen in the dark web, in which we are not even aware. And a lot of people, they are just scratching the surface when they think that everything happens in the clear web. Well, so much work happens in the dark web that we are not even aware. And that use case helped the client show what's going on in the dark web, what's going on, what were their assets which were being exposed, which they were completely unaware of. That discovery helped clients know about some of the tools which were, they thought they were already no longer using it, but they still had ends open sitting on the internet. And as Ed rightly mentioned, right, means you can run a scan, you can try to find out and do the discovery, but by the time you finish, you probably may have gone and added a few more assets. So there's no way to go back. So that continuous part, which Ed was mentioning, is the key, because if you're not even aware what you added, then you have to wait for the next compliance scan, which you're going to do. So a lot of people just do it scan for the compliance reasons, so they can have that checkbox. And that's not going to be too useful if you're trying to be protective. Are you trying to be a protective, or are you just telling the attackers by putting out a sign that, yes, I've done my due diligence? So are you doing it for due diligence, or are you doing it for proactive security monitoring of your assets? That's the key. And Paul, to say that how we would have done it differently, absolutely. Things would have been so much differently done had we done it right now. And I'm sure the results would have been very, very different. Sorry, Bikash, you're trying to say something?
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
The use case, I wish everybody knew the client, because we'd like to talk to them. I'd like to talk to them. I'm just kidding. So changing gears a little bit, we have 16 minutes left, but I wanted to talk a little bit, or kind of go down the two different directions. First direction is back to you, Bikash. We'll let you be quiet long enough here. Some of the key capabilities of external attack surface management incorporated with some of the, let's tie the modules together. I'm just going to kind of go there, right? So there's there's the EASM component, again, recon, discovery, asset inventory, whatever the buzz is, right? Boom, that's must have, right? And that in a continuous on a continuous basis. There's also there's a lot of new acronyms out there as well. Continuous automated red teaming, CART. Continuous automated security testing, CAST, right? Automated exploitation, right? Ed talked a little bit about breach attack simulation. Key capabilities of a full end-to-end EASM solution. What are your thoughts, Bikash, on that? And then I know that I think we have some folks on the phone as well that come from the consulting world, right? That are consulting, they're doing cybersecurity consulting. Talk a little bit about how you think that a comprehensive EASM / continuous testing, package could assist and potentially helping to automate what has been, let's say, automate some of what has been a traditionally manual process. We will never, I want to make this statement, we will never get rid of the human. That is not the intent of EASM or, CART or CAST or whatever, right? It is about making the human smarter, right? It is about making the human, giving the human the ability to do the high dollar stuff. And I'm just focusing on consulting right now, right, in that world. Ed, you and Tejas, you live in that world because you have practices that are focused on that. So making the human smarter as it relates to some of the automation and allowing them to focus on the stuff that really the client really needs, which is that repeatable process and that that continuous security architecture design or whatever it might be. So talk a little bit, Bikash, about the key capabilities of a holistic program, and then maybe some of the nuances therein from an overall market perspective.
Sure. So if you look at EASM, and these terminologies are kind of created by different groups, right? You have EASM, you have BAS, and there's some overlap there. You have ASM, which is there. Let me talk about it as broad concept, like what are the key capabilities that one should look for. So one of the primary capability is discovery, right? So discovery of assets. Now, when you look for the discovery of assets, the key things to look for is what kind of assets does it discover? Does it discover the cloud buckets? Does it discover the applications? Does it discover the APIs, the subdomains, the IP addresses, etc.? So the coverage of discovery is one of the things. The second thing is the false positives. So when you do EASM, it's a very hard problem because there are ephemeral IPs which are continuously changing on the cloud. How well can you discover those? Now, there's no perfect solution in the world today. Everybody is working towards that, but look for the false positives out there. There are, suppose, WAF IPs and CDN IPs. So those are not exactly your IPs. So how does the system discover those and appropriately tag those assets? So the coverage of asset discovery is one thing. The tagging of asset discovery by type is the second thing. The third is the false positive rate over there. And the fourth thing is also going to be the false negatives. What am I missing out? What are those assets which are out there, but the system is not able to discover? So this is one part. The other part is how frequently is the system doing it? I mean, how many times does the database get refreshed? I mean, does it get refreshed every day? Does it get refreshed every week? So that's the other part, the frequency. The quality of data source which you have, does it cover the dark web? Does it cover only the deep web, etc.? So that's another part of the critical capability. So this is more around the discovery. Now let's move to the next part, which is the active assessment. So does the system also do active assessment? Because when you just do passive discovery through banner grabbing and open source intelligence, there can be a lot of false positives. The vulnerability discovery is not going to be accurate. So does the system have the capability to run real kind of safe attacks, or active assessments? So that's the other. So if there are active assessment modules, what type of modules are there? Knowing those, I mean, does it cover applications or IPs, cloud, Docker container, etc., etc.? So the active assessment capability in depth is the other part which one should look into. Then the third part will be the kind of runbooks which are there. If also red teaming, as some of you have noticed, Gartner also mentioned in the EASM report that there are two kind of directions in which the EASM market is heading towards. One direction is more about the discovery, another direction is about the red teaming and the attack. So in that case, what kind of red teaming capabilities does the system have? Or the solution have? So these are some of the broad kind of capabilities one should look for while evaluating a solution. And of course, the use of this tool could be in two ways. One is like end user organizations using it. The other could be managed services, consulting companies using it. But whatever be the use, largely these are the critical capabilities. But if you are a consulting company or a managed services provider, then there are some more use cases which becomes more important. But I'm not getting into that direction in the interest of time. So that's broadly about the critical capabilities, Paul.
Thanks, Bikash. I appreciate that. So I'm going to do a time check. We have 9 minutes left. I have a couple. I keep looking over here, and I feel bad because you're seeing like my bald spot on the top of my head. I'm looking at my phone, but our lady behind the curtain, Pulami, is sending me a couple of really important questions that I'd like to have answered before we get off the phone. But before that, one kind of last point that you had mentioned earlier that I'd love to maybe get your take on, and that is the kind of the overview of the MITRE ATT&CK framework as it relates to the EASM kind of world from your perspective, because I know that, you know, those types of requirements are always kind of dangling out there. As much as we like to, as much as we don't like to admit it, it is the nature of our beast. So maybe for 3 or 4 minutes we can do that and talk about that, and then we can jump over to a couple questions.
Absolutely. So I'll try to keep this brief so we have some time to answer questions. But in my opinion, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, in a word, is awesome. It is literally a collection of attacker techniques and tactics used in the real world. So what MITRE did, and MITRE is a U.S. government think tank, research organization. They researched thousands of actual attacks on IT systems, applications, infrastructure, IoT devices, etc., and documented 215 discrete techniques. And they organized them in various groups. And we've talked about some of those groups already: reconnaissance, exfiltration, privilege escalation, etc. But they don't just document the attacks; they also document mitigations that you can put in place for the attacks. But to me, the relevance and importance of the MITRE ATT&CK framework is it delivers to you exactly what an adversary is going to be doing to your infrastructure. And it allows you, by practicing or implementing some of these attack techniques, which is typically a red team activity, to build a lot of the defensive postures, blue team technique. So as you're building the products and services that run your enterprise, you can do so with that defensive mindset and a more secure mindset, and that's the purple teaming concept. So from an attack surface management perspective, you have external attack surface management, all of the reconnaissance, the discovery, the credential access, that's what attackers are doing anyways, and that's what a good external attack surface management platform will do for you. A lot of the EASM platforms are implementing many of these 215 discrete attacker techniques that the MITRE ATT&CK framework documents. So, and the MITRE ATT&CK framework, by the way, is free. They've got downloadable assets. It's just a really useful, valuable resource. So highly encourage folks to go and learn about
it. Thanks, Ed, for that. Appreciate it. Anybody, Bikash or Tejas, anything to add before I throw a few questions at you?
Maybe if we can get into the question, considering we just have 5 minutes. Unless they just want to add something.
No, I think I'm good too. So please go to the questions.
Excellent. Cool. So here's a couple questions, and they're coming at us from every aspect, from a business perspective, from a technology complement perspective, and then from a technical perspective. So I'm gonna just pick one, because I like this one. I like this one the best. How does external attack surface management complement other security technologies? So I like to use the term all the time. How do we help leverage total cost of ownership in an environment, right? Is EASM going in there to try to replace things, or is it something where you can create a technology integration to, again, where EASM can kind of, you know, I'm an old guy, used to these BASF used to have a commercial on TV. It was called, "We don't make your speaker, we make it louder." So does EASM make your speaker louder, or does it replace the speaker, right? So I think it makes it louder, but I don't know. Anybody answer that? How does EASM, in your mind, I'm going to throw this out to Tejas. How would this this type of security offering, external attack surface management, complement other security tools that have been deployed.
So what I would take and say, compare it with something like a digital risk protection. So if you look at EASM, that focuses more on the discovery aspects. That's like Bikash mentioned, that's primarily more on the recon side. Well, something like a digital risk protection provides you a 360-degree view. It also does a takedown. But EASM, as it stands, like Paul, you rightly mentioned in the BASF analogy, right? It's not replacing, or it's not taking away your speaker and creating a new one. It's not doing something which has not been done before. It's just possibly providing some method to the madness and organizing things better, so that we understand that to treat the external attacks differently and the external assets differently in terms of the risk it brings to the table as compared to the internal assets.
Yeah.
So
let me add to that a little bit. So the thanks, Tejas. So I mean, apart from a few of the key things which you mentioned, EASM complements a few of the aspects. Like for example, it complements the vulnerability management program, because a VM program is as good as the coverage of its assets, right? If you don't have the coverage of assets, then you can't do a good job, right? So that's one. The second thing which it brings is the continuity. I mean, you can do reconnaissance as a consulting exercise using team, using open source tool, but can you do that on an hourly basis? Can you do that on a daily basis? It's not possible, right? So it complements those programs by giving you the ability to do it on a continuous basis. And today, if you look at the ransomware guys, the nation state actors, they are doing it continuously. So we should also do it continuously. That's the kind of second area where it complements. It also complements the red and blue teaming organization in a way, because it frees up a lot of their, like maybe, I don't know, 80% of their bandwidth in terms of doing those same old stuff, so that can be given to automated tools and they can do those deeper and more complex stuff. So it can also augment your red teaming organization. It can also augment the SOC, like what I mentioned the last time, and the TI program. So I'm not elaborating on that. So EASM does a few things which others don't do in certain ways, but then it also augments multiple of those internal security programs which are already existing, which gives the completeness, which helps in the completeness, and which also helps in the continuity. May not be the depth, as Ed mentioned. EASM is more about the breadth, but for depth you need to go for pen testing and the other stuff. So it offers or complements many of these programs in terms of breadth of coverage and continuity.
That's great.
And by the way, Paul, I know there's some more questions. I have a hard stop, so I would let Ed and Tejas.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that was a great. I think that was a great way to end. I mean, I think we all have, I want to be respectful of everybody's time and all the attendees and all of our panelists. We very much appreciate everything you guys were able to do for us today. This is very interactive. We probably could go for 5 hours on this thing, but then we would all be asleep and eating our arms and stuff like that. But no, great job today. Thank you all very much. Thank you for the attendees. Pulami behind the curtain, thank you for all of your participation and support. We'll see you all next week at the CISO platform. Stay well, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.